Hi and good morning, and you're very welcome to this webinar on the new ERR for Ireland with the expenses in Enterprise. I'm Sharon Mulligan, the product expert here with Enterprise. So I'm just going to give you a nice, simple, quick overview of the changes that we've provided to enable you to export and report on the expenses for the revenue online. So let's dive right in and just give a little bit of background. So this will be a nice, quick, short presentation. So if we kick off here, just in terms of the overview, we all know what it's about in terms of the ERR. So what we're providing here is the enhanced reporting requirements, because all employers in Ireland are required to return details of all expenses paid directly to the employees and directors from the 1st of January 2024. And in terms of what that covers, so the following categories would be travel and subsistence, small benefit vouchers, and remote working daily allowance. Just to let you know as well, sorry, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you wish to pop in a question, we have a Q&A button there. If you want to pop in a question, I will look to answer any questions that you may have towards the end of the webinar. Okay, so this is why we're here. We want to see how the expense details are going to be returned to the revenue from Enterprise. And why do revenue need this information? Well, they've clearly set out the guidelines for compliance to ensure that compliant employers, so to take resources away from compliant employers. So if you're always returning the information based on all of the expenses that are recorded against your employees, it's just to take away and to ensure that everybody is being compliant. And of course, they obviously provide all of that data back to the Department of Finance, which is where this has all obviously come from. And of course, increasing visibility and assurance for employees in relation to non-taxable payments. So I know they've got further information coming on their website in due course. So that's the reasons why. So just to stay compliant and be visible at all times. So I've mentioned there at the very beginning, so there's certain categories that are covered for the reporting. And you can see there they fall into travel and subsistence, small benefits and remote working. And within each of those categories, so for example, travel and subsistence has a number of subcategories. So we enable that through Enterprise, where you can choose the relevant subcategories for each expense type. And through the output file that we produce in Enterprise, that will produce the date and the amount paid for each of the following. And the same again with small benefits, the amount paid and the date. And for the remote working, it has to include the number of days, the amount paid and the date on the output file. So just to look at the Enterprise changes themselves, so these are prerequisites. This is what we need you to have in the system in order to capture all of those expenses before you output those and send them to the revenue. And very simply, because obviously Enterprise, as you know, is a business management platform, generally we don't retain payroll information, but what we will allow you to do here is first and foremost to define your employer number. And that's very simply done within the organization settings. So we'll go through a demonstration and I will show you exactly where that has to be populated. On the expense setup screen itself, so against each of the employees, you add the PPS number and the employee payroll number or the employee ID number that you have in your payroll system. And then for each expense type, you assign the category. So whether it's travel and subsistence, whether it's the small benefits, or whether it's remote working. And then of course, for travel and subsistence itself, you will be able to select from a list of predefined subcategories. And that's all done through the settings in module settings and then under expenses. So nice and easy, 3 specific prerequisites that you need to have defined in the system. So even if you have expenses already added, once you have assigned this information, it will retrospectively pick up those expenses on the report and output them then on the output file. Okay. So just to show you what we actually do, where that leads to then within Enterprise before we go into the live demonstration. So very simply what we've done, in the expenses menu itself on the left-hand side, we have a new tile simply called ERR. And within that, you have the option there to populate the expected payment date. So remember, this is the payment date that the revenue expect you to pop in prior to, so when you're submitting the expenses, because the rule that they have, the one particular rule that they have is that the file is submitted to them prior to the employee being paid. I know that's one of the stipulations they have within their website, but you will know that, or you will have been educated on that, and certainly do check it out with your accountant if you're unsure of all of the rules to capture the information. So the expected payment date, that's the date that will go on the file. Then there's a reference for the file as well that you can populate here. And then the filter. So this is the date range for the expenses. So where to collect the range of expenses. So you can see there, I've just got from the beginning of the month to the end of the month. And then you simply just apply the filters. So when you apply the filters, the next screen then pops up, and you can see there the grid then below that is populated with all of the expenses captured within that particular date range. And then all you simply do, so you can see there's all the different expenses. I can see the categories. I can see where the subcategory, of course, is relevant as well. And the currency and obviously the amount. And then ultimately then all I do is select the relevant expenses. When I select those expenses, the total value at the top will populate with the selected expenses. And then I simply click on download ERR file, and then I will get my output file produced that I can save to a location on my laptop or PC, whatever platform you're working from. And one thing to note is that when I select the expenses and click on download, the expenses are then removed from the screen. So it clears them down, ready then, of course, for the next month. Your expenses, of course, are still within the system, but they're cleared down for the purpose of the return to the revenue. Okay, so that's how simple it is that we have the system set up to capture all the information. So I'm just going to jump in and do a live demonstration and show you how all of those elements are brought together. So let me just share my screen. Just bear with me 1 second. Here we go. And here we are into Enterprise, and let me just maximize that screen for you and we'll log in. So once we log into the system, if you remember the list of prerequisites, so nice and simple, let me just change my organization as well. And I'm going to pop in here first and foremost to settings. And starting off here with the organization settings, if we come down here, you will see here in the middle of the screen, we have an employer reference. So this is where you put in your employer number. So that's the first step. And don't forget, once you populate that screen, there is a save button down here at the bottom for you to click on. And then proceeding across then to module settings. So this is your second step. And then into module settings, we scroll down here and we can click on any of these options here. So let's go into assign expense users. And the first protocol is against each of our employees. We need to define, as you can see here, there are 2 new fields. We've got the PPSN. I'm just going to sort that so you can see that at the top, and the employment ID. So very simply, all I have to do is click on edit against each of my employees and populate the PPSN number and their employment ID number. So what you would normally have them on the payroll system for when returning information to the revenue against that employee. So nice and simple, populate those 2 fields and click on save against each of your employees. And then scrolling on down to the expense items. So obviously be sure that for each expense item that you utilize within your organization, that you understand the compliance that is required and which category is required. So whether that you already know that information in advance, or you talk to your accountant, or you check with the revenue to ensure that you have it categorized correctly. So again, what we've done here is we've introduced 2 new columns on the screen here, ERR category and ERR subcategory. So subcategory will only be relevant to anything that falls under travel and subsistence. So as you can see there, I've left some of these, in fact, blank. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add one in for an existing expense type just to show you how that works. And I'm actually just going to, I can say that that's maybe a small benefits. I know it's potentially not relevant to training, but just to populate it and show you. You will see for small benefits that in fact there's no pop down for the subcategory. So let me just save that. And just to go back here, for example, to the mileage, because mileage, as you know, is travel unvouched. So when we edit that, just want to show you that the fact that you've chosen travel and subsistence, you can see there that you get a list of predefined subcategories, which are the ones that I outlined in the previous slide as per the revenue guidelines. So I can select here travel unvouched and I can click on save. And that's it. So what you're doing is assigning each of the relevant categories, and only if it's relevant to travel and subsistence, the subcategory relevant to that particular travel and subsistence. So for each of your expense items, to ensure that each and every one of those are captured and captured correctly. Okay, so that's your second step. So all within here, within module settings, assign the PPSN number, the employment number for each of your employees, and then scroll down for each of your expense types and assign it to the relevant ERR category and subcategory. And yes is the answer. Can this be done retrospective? So what if you've already entered all of your expenses? Yes, if you assign those now, they will be picked up on the output report because it's looking to where the expenses have been assigned, not the time at which it was assigned, but that they have been assigned a relevant category. Okay, and then just make sure that you save each line, and again for each of your employees. Now, I've just obviously entered a category there for training for the small benefits. So I want to maybe just to show you, if I just add an expense here, I'm just going to add a receipt for training just to put it through the system. I'm going to, it doesn't matter, I can put it in for today's date. I can put it in for the end of January. I just want to show you just to show you that retrospectively it's going to pick it up, and I'm going to collect there on the training, and I'm going to go employee paid because again it's relevant to employee paid employees only, and I'm just going to put in an amount, and we can put in Dublin, Ireland, and let me just put in a purpose as well because we know we have to have the purpose in there, and let me just save that. Okay, and that's gone through. And what I want to be able to do there as well, I want to approve that. This is the other point. So obviously it's only going to look at expenses that have been approved. So I'm just going to approve this particular one here. You can see on the training. Let me just approve that. Okay, and now let's just dive straight into the ERR tab. So when we come into the ERR tab, so this is where you first define the payment date or the expected payment date. Now I know the one rule that revenue, again, just to go back to that, that you report on the expenses prior to actually reimbursing or paying the employee. So you can you can put in a date here or choose your date from the drop-down list. And if we pull in the dates here, let me just select the dates here for the expenses that I have in the system. I can pop in a reference as well. I'm just going to put in Jan 24. I'm just going to apply the filters. And you can see here a list of all the expenses that I have approved and that have been assigned to relevant ERR categories. And you can see there, the one there at the top is the one that I have just added to the system. Now, if you want to see the dates of those, we also have, as we do with all the grids throughout Enterprise, in the elliptical menu here, you can simply click on the column chooser, and I can drag and drop the date into there. So I can see the date of the actual expense that was added into the system. I can see when it was added through the system. So at least I just have that information just as a viewing point before I submit that and bring it through to the file. So you can see there, all of the categories are shown and the subcategories were relevant to travel and subsistence. And very simply, when I'm ready to create my export file, I can just select the top one there, or I can select all of them if I was doing the full month altogether. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select two of them just to show you what's going to happen. And I'm simply going to click on download ERR file. And as you can see there, the screen clears out. It goes in to create a JSON file. So I can specify where to save that particular file to. So I can just pop that into my documents here. I'll just pop it in here and I can just say January expenses, whatever name you want to give that particular file, but the format is there for the JSON file, and click on save. If you leave the file name as is, it's got all the relevant dates and your employer reference, etc. on the particular file name as well. But I'm just going to pop that in so I can see that particular file name, and then click on save. And the file is now downloaded and saved to that particular location, and it's ready for you now to pick up and to return to the revenue online. But as you can see on the screen itself, is that those two particular expenses that I selected have now been removed from the screen. And they are now on the output file, ready to be returned to the revenue. So really, it's that simple. That's all the steps that are involved. So defining your organization employer's number, defining the PPS number and employee payroll number for each of your employees in the expense module settings, and also against each expense type to specify the ERR category, and where relevant, obviously for travel and subsistence, the ERR subcategory. And then from there, add in all your expenses as per normal, approve your expenses, and then this screen will be populated based on the date range that you select. For those expenses, the screen will populate all of the relevant expenses for the employee paid expenses. So nice and simple. So just let me just quickly check to see if there's anything there in the Q&A that we have. Okay, somebody has asked there about define vouched for subsistence. Yeah, so vouched generally means, yeah, that you have a receipt. So unvouched where you don't have a receipt. I know the terminology that the revenue use. So yes, so if you're paying civil service rates, so if you're using civil service rates, or for example, if you're populating the subsistence rate, so it's obviously going to pick up if you're adding subsistence as well for medical, for nursing, etc. If you're using that as well within the system, it will pick up the subsistence. And vouched basically means, yeah, that you have a record, that you have a receipt for that. And unvouched, which is generally like, for example, the mileage, you don't have a receipt for it. You're taking a word that somebody has travelled to Limerick or wherever, and the mileage is whatever value that is on the day. And yes, the recording, another question in, will the recording be going out on this? Absolutely. We will make sure that you get the recording today. I'd like you to have the recording today. So I will get that sent out to all attendees and invitees today as soon as possible. Just to make you aware, I've just kept my screen shared there for you at the moment because I wanted to show you what I've also done as well in relation to the help center. I just want to make you aware of this as well, so that as you're going through the steps that I've pointed out, when you come in here to the Help Center, click in here to the knowledge base. And what I've done is I've made it very simple. I've populated an article up here at the very top of the screen under the news and updates for the ERR enhanced reporting requirement for Ireland. Simply click into that. And all of the steps that I've gone through there on screen are also available within this article. So you have direct help on screen. And also, of course, if you have any issues at all, certainly do reach out to our support department as well. In terms of whether expenses are vouched and unvouched, please do check those out with your accountant or obviously the revenue to ensure that you're categorizing those correctly. So employer number, is this the company VAT number? No, it's the employer number is what you've registered as the employer ID for revenue purposes, for payroll purposes. So this is what you'd normally have at the top of your payslip as your employer number. So you need to make sure that that goes in against, you need to make sure that that goes in against the organization settings. So the employee ID, So just to go back to that, I've just have another question in there about the employee ID. So let me just go back into the settings option and just to make that very clear. So the organization details. So this particular company ID is your employer. This is the employer ID that's registered as an employer with the revenue for the purpose, so for the purposes of payroll. So just to make sure that we're populating this field here to ensure that it gets picked up on the ERR file. And then within the module settings itself, each employee's, so the employee ID is what you would generally have as their payroll number. So you know the way, for example, when you're submitting P35s, P60s, etc., to the revenue, and you're submitting PYE and PRSI to the revenue, that goes against their employer number. So you have them on your system, on your payroll system, as a specific ID. So that's what we're talking about in relation to the employee ID on the revenue. So you've got the PPS number and the employee ID. So somebody's asked me there about where to place broadband paid to an employee, but for which we receive no receipt, go under small benefits. I wouldn't think so. I would suggest you check that with revenue. I would think that would be more so under recouped against, remote working from home, like expenses like light and heat, etc. That would be something entirely different. I mean, small benefits would be something like where you give somebody a gift card, for example. You know, the small benefits where maybe at end of year as a bonus for Christmas, they might get a small benefit, 300-400 euro, 500 euro. In a way that's capped. As far as I know, that's two benefits a year and it's capped at 1,000 euros. So that's completely different. So anything like that in terms of specific expense types and how to classify them, I would directly, if you're not already doing that, I would certainly directly check that with the revenue to be absolutely sure, or directly with your accountant. But definitely small benefits is something to do with, it's to do with the fact that if you're giving somebody, like I said, a card, for example, one of those Plex cards, a little MasterCard that might have a value on it, maybe up to 500 euro, whatever, at the end of the year, but it is capped at 1,000 and up to 2 benefits a year. So that's entirely different. Whereas broadband for working from home would, for me, looking at that, and I work from home, would fall under probably the working from home and be captured in that. But I would certainly check all of those specific details with revenue. So working from home, the 320 per day allowance, again, check those with revenue. So that's the 320 per day allowance. So what we do, we allow you to capture the number of days and obviously calculate that rate within the system. But when it comes to other expenses and working from home, you would need to make sure if they're capped when recouping those with the revenue. So that's something you would have to directly check with revenue on, if that's okay. Okay, somebody's asking there about a fuel card amounts from mileage. How do we deduct? Is the fuel card prepaid? Is it company paid? Is it something that you're reimbursing the employee? So you've got to look at that as well to see if that's something. These expenses that you're obviously submitting through the ERR are all expenses that are employee or relevant to employee paid, and that's where you're reimbursing the employee. Any expenses, excuse me, that are charged through, for example, the company credit card or paid on the company credit card are not required to be returned through the ERR because they're already being paid through the company expense account. So it's where you're reimbursing the employee. So again, I would definitely check those out directly with the revenue and ensure that you have covered all aspects of any expenses that you are reimbursing each of your employees. Okay, just checking there now to see if there's any more questions coming through. I don't see any more questions just at the moment. So yes, just to be very clear, we will get this recording out to you. You have the Help Center file as well to take you through all of the steps that are needed to get going and to get this set up on your system from today. This is live on the system, so it's within the live enterprise as we speak. So you are ready to go in setting those up against each of your employees and against each of your expense types. Okay, so let me just go back to my presentation. No more questions coming in there just at the moment. Thank you all so much for taking the time this morning. I hope that has helped to alleviate any of the myths around what you need to do to get the ERR up and running. And I hope it's allowed you to see how simple it is and it will be to implement that within Enterprise. Let me just check. I think somebody has just come in about the file itself. So the JSON file. The JSON file, is it editable? I'm not going to say no, and absolutely it is editable once it has been exported. But remember, you're exporting information on the basis that what you've accepted and approved within the system is is correct at the time. There may be obviously a point in time where you exported and maybe maybe the wrong date was implemented, or you chose the wrong date for something, maybe on the payment date. Somebody that has knowledge, if you go to edit the file, it will open up in Notepad. As with all output files, it's in a, if you look at the JSON, it's kind of similar to the HTML output. So yes, you will be, I'm not going to say no to it because you will be able to open it if you have some knowledge in doing so. But obviously remember that you're being compliant. You've already confirmed the information on screen. But again, if revenue come back and say, look, the date is wrong, obviously you could always amend the date on the file to correct it. But do come back to us if there's any issues that you discover on the file, depending on the expense type that you have. You know, we've put all the expense types through in terms of all the testing, but do let us know if there's anything that comes back that's specific to your organization. But other than that, yeah, it all should be fine. Okay, great. Excellent. Thanks a million for all the questions. I appreciate all of those and wish you the best of luck with everything for the expenses. And do reach out. Let us know if you have any issues, any problems at all. And if you require any further help, like I said, we've got the Help Center article and we'll make sure that you have this recording as soon as possible. Just checking there. I think somebody's just come in with another question. Let me just answer that for you there as well. Okay, so paying a subsistence daily rate. Does each day need to be entered separately or can they be entered in bulk, i.e. one entry per month? So if you're using subsistence daily rates, we do have an option to switch on the subsistence and you can define a table with the daily rates already assigned to that and then choose that subsistence type. So as you type it in, I think they have to be recorded separately as far as I know. So again, just to verify that with the revenue, as far as I know, I don't think you can just put in one bulk subsistence entry for everything for the month. I think you have to specify for each one because it records the days and the number of days and hours over that time period, and you've got a date from and a date to on the subsistence. So you'll need to be very clear on that if you are using the subsistence as an entry within the system. So we do have a tick box just to show you that here. Let me just go back to that for 1 second. Let me just share that screen for you there again. So back in settings, if you are going to use the subsistence option, into module settings, down to expenses, and you can see there, enable subsistence. And what this does is it brings up a table where you can define the relevant daily rates. And then through the expenses option, you can then add a subsistence. And then through here, you can clearly define the from and to dates, the total time, whether it was an overnight, and it has all the relevant rates and daily rates for subsistence already in the table in the back end. When you switch on that option I showed you there in settings, you can populate the table with all the relevant subsistence rates. So it's nice and simple. Okay, great. I think that's it in relation to the questions, and again, appreciate all of those coming through. Thank you so much for your time. Let me get this recording organized for you as soon as possible. So once we finish up now, I will work on getting this completed and getting this to you today as soon as possible, if that's all right. Brilliant. Thank you all so much. And I really appreciate you taking the time out. And we look forward to seeing you on any of our future webinars. And if you have any questions, do reach out to our sales and support. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care and have a great rest of day. Thank you.